I have stuff going on in my head all the time. It's like there's a radio on that I can just adjust the volume of. There's a constant melody or something going through my head all the time. And there are times when something will stick and I say, oh, wait, I like that. And I'll go grab my guitar. I'll sit down at my computer and try to work some beats out or something. I keep a couple of documents. One is just log lines for ideas for scripts. The other is concepts. I mean, I have a ton of concepts and ideas to go back to on there. And every month or two, I take a look at it again and just say, oh, yeah, this was a really good one. I could elaborate on this.
Welcome to the Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing podcast. There has never been a better time for writers. More information, options, and opportunities are available to you, but navigating these requires insight. Join Mark Leslie Lefebvre as he draws upon more than a quarter century of experience as a writer, a bookseller, and a trusted book industry consultant to explore and reflect on the writing and publishing landscape to help you make informed choices on your writer journey.
Hello, Reflectives, and welcome to episode 359 of the Stark Reflections podcast. This is your host, Mark Leslie Lefebvre. In today's episode, I have an interview with author, songwriter, musician, and podcaster Aaron Palmer. Aaron, along with co-host Ken Hall, run the Native Tongues podcast. Their podcast is a chance to hear from writers and musicians about where they call home and how that place shaped their voice. They discuss the author or songwriter's influences, creative process, and the places from their hometown that are meaningful to them. Now, we talk about Aaron's podcast, his writing, his music, and so much more, and that's coming up later in this episode. But first, let's hear a word from this episode's sponsor.
Ready to elevate your writing career? Join the Cruising Writers Group sailing the Caribbean from Galveston on February 22nd to March 1st, 2025. This time, we're focused on indie authors, with special guests Mark Leslie and Aaron Wright leading a deep dive into the world of self-publishing. You'll come away with invaluable insights, but also great memories as you connect with other writers and explore charming ports of call in Roatan, Honduras, Costa Maya, Mexico, and Cozumel. Visit cruisingwriters.com to book your spot today.
That's right. This episode is sponsored by Cruising Writers, and I'm honored to be a guest for Cruising Writers, which is coming up in the winter of 2025. You may want to check it out. An awesome opportunity to be on a cruise with myself and Aaron Wright and other awesome writers and get some writing done and do some workshops and tons of one-on-one time. So exciting. I do want to thank my sponsor, Cruising Writers, but I also want to thank the awesome patrons who support this podcast over at patreon.com/starkreflections. Thank you guys so much for your amazing support. And also thank you to those folks who have gone over to Buy Me a Coffee and have donated. I really appreciate that. That really helps a lot in terms of the time that I put into producing the show, which I absolutely adore and love because I get an intrinsic reward from it. And speaking of which, intrinsic rewards harkens back to episode 358, so let's hear some comments from recent episodes. So, comments from episode 358, A Way of the Parable Writer with Don King. Edwin Downward says, over at starkreflections.ca in the comment section, for this episode, I find myself captivated by the why question. When it comes to being asked why I write, my answer generally comes down to one of two forms. I have an option, and writing happens where I have a choice is in where I focus my energy. Yet Don suggested we need to ask why towards finding a deeper answer. In contemplating this, I found something I didn't have the language to describe until recently. For all the books I've read over the decades, only a handful of them ever featured a character who looked like me on the inside. If we are to read a book that hasn't been written yet, we have to write it. That is the deepest why I've been able to arrive at so far. Edwin, thank you so much for sharing that. I love that you took Don's suggestion and explored the deeper why, and that is just absolutely perfect. And you also tied back into that, I think that was a Toni Morrison quote. I know Don will correct me here or send me, remind me. It's like, no, it wasn't Toni Morrison, but I'm pretty sure it was Toni Morrison who said, write the book that you want to read if it hasn't made. But there I go again, messing up quotes from amazing writers. But yeah, writing the book that hasn't been written yet. So that's awesome. I love that you explored that. And, of course, in a very meta aspect, Don King also commented on the episode in which he was the guest, saying, that is an excellent why. And Don's referring to my reflections at the end of the episode. He says, that is an excellent why. I think it meets all the guidelines for drilling down to the real why. And I'm certain there is a story behind the stories that you write. I'm glad you're sharing them with the world. Thanks so much, Don. Two things. The story behind the stories is something I started to do back in 2004 when I published my very first book, a collection of horror stories called One Hand Screaming. I had a whole chapter at the end dedicated to notes of behind the stories. I always loved that when writers shared the behind the stories, and I wanted to do that. And many of the comments and reviews I've had over the years from people, not just for One Hand Screaming, but also pretty much most of my other fiction books have that note from the author at the end. The people actually really love the insights, so I'm pretty thrilled about that. But the second thing, and I have to thank you for this, Don, is, I often come to a time where I'm traveling so much or so much is going on, and I wonder can I continue to do the podcast? Can I continue to invest? I'll be honest with you, it's roughly... It's got to be about 6 to 8 hours per episode that I dedicate. So that's like almost a full day's work. No, I do not work full time. I basically don't have a full time job. Draft to Digital is my biggest client, and I put 20 hours of the week aside for them, and I love working with them. They're amazing. Now the rest is for writing and other consulting that I do, but this investment in the podcast brings me a huge intrinsic reward, and I'm reading a book by Adam Grant called Hidden Potential, and there's several chapters where he mentions the value of that intrinsic reward, that you're getting that reward up front. And I know I've said this in my reflections in the last episode, but exploring the why, the way Don suggested I explored the why, really helped me in a significant way. And that reminds me that I get value from doing this. The other thing, again, that I was reminded of in Adam Grant's book is that teaching other people often helps you learn it better. Studies have shown that. I remember tutoring math in high school, and I was never good at math, but I was tutoring younger students at high school, a couple grades younger than me. And the minute I started tutoring them, my grades went up in math. I got it more because I approached it in a different way. And so, do you see, dear listener, at how me helping other writers helps me? So really, it's a selfish thing that I'm doing, but I love that I can help other writers. Okay, so that's rambling reflections from the comments. Thank you, Edwin and Don and everyone who's left comments. Love when you leave comments over at starkreflections.ca. You can also email me, mark@marklustley.ca. And I just realized I haven't gone back to YouTube to check comments, so I'll have to do that for the next episode because I've already rambled on too long. All right, let's get on to what is going to be a pretty long personal update. Okay, so first personal update is last weekend I had the huge honor of being one of the speakers at Tao Wong's Toronto Indie Author Conference, in the very first conference of its kind. And a huge thank you to Tao and his staff and the many amazing volunteers who made this conference happen. And I say this on behalf of myself. I appreciate you guys so much, but I say it on behalf of so many of the writers I spoke to who loved what went on. And I know how much this cost, and I know it probably burned a hole into his pocket. And he did this, because he wanted to do something for other writers, and he wanted to have something in Canada. And I know so many writers that I spoke to benefited from it, because several writers I was chatting with there said they had never been to a writers' conference before because there had never been anything that was for them. And so that's huge. And I am committing right now publicly that I'm going to sponsor the conference next year. I'm going to up my game. I'm going to give more money to the conference because I want to help this conference be hugely successful. And of course, a huge thank you to all of the folks that I got a chance to chat with, even drink with and hang out with, have lunch with, etc. Listeners to this podcast, thank you guys. I mean, it really, truly warms my heart like you wouldn't believe when I find out, when I see someone who's, one of my talks or hanging out in the hallway or whatever, who says that they listen to the podcast, because I'm like, whoa, that is so cool. Because again, it does feel like I'm speaking into a void oftentimes. And so that really, really is awesome. Even Elsie Plant, thank you. It was great. I got to hang out with you and your husband. And thank you so much for the awesome 6-pack of beer from the Kincardine Brewery. You guys are amazing. I really appreciate that. I've only had one of them so far. I want to kind of extend the enjoyment of these beers over, because when I'm not at a conference, I don't drink during the week. I only drink on the weekends. And so I did have one with dinner on the Sunday night when I got home, which was great. And I'm going to enjoy some more this coming weekend. So thank you guys so much. And yeah, just amazing that I got a chance to hang out with so many of you and take photos and selfies and etc. But honestly, an amazing conference. If you're a Canadian author and you're listening to this and you live anywhere near Toronto, definitely go check out the website. I'll have a link to it. I'll have a link to my interview with Dow about this conference in the show notes at starkreflections.ca. Really beneficial. I mean, hang on, I'll grab my notebook here. There's a notebook right. Oh, you hear the squeak of the chair. I go to the notebook and I took, because I went to every session. It was only, 2 tracks. All right, how many pages of notes did I take? I took, okay, we go. So there's a page of just ideas in general that I took that were separate from my notes. But I took 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. Okay, and then 18 I started, but then I didn't write anything on it. 17 pages of handwritten notes. And this is like a 6x9 notebook from this amazing conference, from the conversations, the panels, the presentations. And wow, absolute wow. Gotta check it out. Okay, other personal update. I got the audio files back from Scott Overton, an awesome narrator, the voice of Michael Andrews for Canadian Werewolf. So I got the audio files back from Only Monsters in the Building, but I haven't published them yet for a couple of reasons. I also got back editorial notes from 3 different proofreaders. That allowed me to make a few small tweaks and revisions and things that I did not catch in the previous edits, etc. And I know that's a little ass backwards because, I was behind in getting the book out. So I kind of had to, as I sent it off to a few people to do some proofread, I had to publish it. And so I feel bad about that. So there were, maybe about a dozen, maybe 15 sort of things that I missed, or even some misspellings and mislabeling of characters, etc. Nothing too major, but again, and I know there's probably dozens more that'll never get caught. Every book that is published has those things. But I'm going to try to learn my lesson Who knows if I ever will learn a lesson for the next books in the series, and trying to give myself even more buffer time. But again, I have to come up with a new plan because of the way I know my neurodivergence works. that I will always go right to the very end in that procrastination. So, but anyways, the other thing about this, one of the other reasons I haven't released the audio yet is Michael has a lot of conversations in the book with a therapist, Dr. Brandon Laurier. And I thought it would be neat, since there's so much of some of my own trauma, etc., or fictionalized trauma in the book. And a lot of Michael's trauma as he's sitting down with a therapist and having these conversations, is I thought, wouldn't it be very meta and cool if I, as the writer, do the voice of the therapist? Now, there's a lot of that. And so a couple challenges there. There's going to be some challenges with the different room noise for Scott and for myself, but that's okay. I've had that because I've taken Scott's audio, and I've taken audio from Sarah Sampino, who does the voice of Gail, and I've mixed them together, and the room noise differences, because they're in different rooms, different studios, haven't seemed to caused any issue. I didn't hear any, and I haven't heard any complaints from people. So I'm be very careful about setting up my own studio and padding it a little bit better, because I have less books, fewer books on the wall behind me with the new bookshelves that I have. So there's a bit more of that echoey space. So I have to pad that a little bit better. But I do plan on doing the voice of Dr. Brandon Laurier, and my voice, if you can't tell, is a little not quite ready for prime time yet. And that leads to my next update. I told you this is going to be a long one. So the cough that wouldn't leave, and I did just edit out a cough. I've edited out many coughs already for this introduction. So the cough that wouldn't leave, it's over 2 months now that I've had a variation of a cough. Now I'm returning to the doctor today, so I'm recording this on May 9th, Thursday, May 9th. And I'm returning to the doctor today to look into the cough that has just persisted. So my main concern, and it really does feel like this because I remember it from before, is that this may be a resurgence of the really, really terrible, horrible allergies that I had when I was a teenager. I was allergic to everything. I was allergic to dust. I was allergic to any animals, like animals, pets. I was allergic to pollen, tree pollen. Spring in general just caused whatever. So the spring months were the worst. And the main symptom I had was this persistent, nonstop cough that just never ended. I kind of outgrew it, but I get the suspicion that they're back. Now, Liz, my partner, is worried that it's a sign of some sort of heart condition. Thank you, Internet, for this. I guess Liz is, read up on the symptoms. And so she's worried that it's an indication of like early heart failure or some sort of heart issue. And since we're getting married in July, finally, I proposed to her in May of 2019, so 5 years ago, I figured it might be good for me to kind of be alive for the event. It'd be a lot more fun at the wedding if we're both alive. That would be really cool. So much more fun. So going to the doctor, I'll figure that out. But again, the challenge, I think, especially with podcasting and wanting to do audio and stuff like that, is I do a lot of speaking. It's kind of hard to speak when your voice is, you're coughing all the time and your voice isn't quite on par. So the final really, really long update is that I'm now working on a number of projects. So several publishing projects for friends. I mean, more than a dozen different titles from a handful of different people. Most of them backlists. Some of them are republishing, revising, tweaking, new formats, etc. Getting those out. And that's really time consuming. I kind of have to take them in small chunks. And then that's on top of some other books. I just got edited manuscript back for another book that I'm publishing in the Unconventional Classroom series with Dave Sweet. The first book in that series is Dave Sweet and Sarah Cades. And it's Skeletons in My Closet, 101 Life Lessons from a Homicide Detective. And so then the second book, which is written by Dave, the different co-author, Susan Forrest, and it's another one in that Unconventional Classroom series. So great book. I haven't even cracked open the manuscript yet, but I have to go through it. I'm going to do my own proofread of that as I get it into formatting and then send that back to them for their approval, and then get my cover designer, Juan, who did a brilliant job with Skeletons in My Closet to do the follow-up on that. And that's work I have set to plan for next week. Other work I've done is, so there's the library and writer celebration called Creatures in the Library that Stark Publishing is doing. This is celebrating writers under 25 from my old stomping grounds in the greater Sudbury region. And so I've been in the process of getting in contact with the winners, getting the contracts, etc., over to the winners, as well as to several writers, yes, writers from my own school who were in the same grade as me, who are doing some additional essays and content to help buff up this and celebrate the awesomeness of libraries, and in particular our love for the Sudbury Library. And so I'm getting those contracts and everything out the door. We're going to get the payments out the door to everyone, and I'm planning on getting that book out by the end of the summer. I'm also working on the nonfiction book in my Stark Publishing Solutions series, A Book in Hand, Strategies for Optimizing Print Book Sales Online via Signings and Other In-Person Events. And I had a short version, sort of a preview version, about 20,000 words. This will probably be about a 50,000 word book in total. I had that available on Story Bundle, and in it I had a link to say, if you get this on Story Bundle, I'll send you the book when it's ready ahead of everyone else. So that's kind of cool. Also, I'll probably try and do something like that for you listeners, get a chance to get the book before anyone else can get it in ebook format at least. And then I'm also in the background when I'm not doing the writing stuff, is I've been chewing on the ideas, and that as I relearned from Becca Syme, one of her talks at the Toronto Indie Author Conference this week, was that non-writing writing that I'm doing as I'm just chewing on some ideas while I do other things. So all of that time I'm spending for book 8 in my Canadian Werewolf series, which I have not put the pre-order for up, but I did put a link to come to my website, fill out a short form, and I'll notify you when the book is ready, and that saves me from myself. But that's for book 8, which is A Canadian Werewolf in London, Ontario, where Michael has a new companion with him to go on an adventure, somebody he met in Only Monsters in the Building. They became close, and they're going to help each other with their own traumas, etc., and their own inability to control their own supernatural, paranormal powers, as Michael returns to London, Ontario to seek his roots as an adopted person. He has never met his birth parents, so there's a whole exploratory thing there. And yes, of course, it is based on the fact that I was adopted, and I was in my mid-20s when I met my birth parents. Awesome, amazing people. But Michael's not going to have quite as good an experience as I had. So that'll be fun as he goes to London, Ontario. And I do plan on bringing back a character that so many people have said, when is Bridget Wells coming back? When is Bridge, that teenage book nerd that Michael met in Stowaway, when's she coming back? And Bridge is going to come back. I'm so excited. I have no idea what's going to happen, but I just can't wait to do what I did before, where I'm just going to have Bridge show up and see what she does, because she's an amazing character. And finally, well, not finally. Yes, maybe it's finally. Who knows? I am compiling the stories and the notes and all of the pieces that are going to go into the 20th anniversary edition of One Hand Screaming. So One Hand Screaming was the very first book I published in 2004, 20 years ago, October 2004. Now, I actually self-published this first edition of the book way back then. Now, 10 years before all the cool kids started self-publishing. And that's when I first registered Stark Publishing as a business. I mean, ebooks weren't even a thing back then. It was just print that I did. And I never did an audiobook for it. But this 20th anniversary release is going to be called One Hand Screaming 20 Haunting Years. It'll be twice the size of the original, if not a little bit more. It'll include at least 15 or 16 new stories and poems that didn't appear in the original edition. Stories that I've published, some of the stories that I've published over the last 20 years, as well as some stories that have never been in print before, like all new original stories, because you got to have those. And new introductions, small introductions for each of the stories, as well as extended behind-the-scene notes at the end. I am planning a Kickstarter for this for mid to late summer. And I'm also going to be creating, among a whole bunch of other assets that go along with this and bonus content, etc., a special craft beer, IPA, to go with the launch. And the beer I plan on calling One Hop Screaming. And I'm going to be working with a local brewery or two. I'm going to see if it's going to be a collaboration beer between two breweries, because I kind of like that. As well as doing some events at the breweries, as well as one of my favorite drinking spots in Kitchener, where I do know the manager and I'm a regular there. Want to see if there's an opportunity, because I plan on doing cool things like when you buy the beer, you'll get a code for the QR code, for example. Maybe I'll give them some coasters. QR code to download the book One Hand Screaming, or some sort of version, or maybe it's a story. I don't know. It'll be some sort of bonus that'll lead people who buy the beer into getting the book, which I think is kind of cool. But in addition to all the stuff I have planned in the celebration of this launch in October 2024, I've actually worked with a small Canadian publisher I've had on this show to sublet a couple of spots in his warehouse. So that book, One Hand Screaming, 20 Haunting Years, will be stocked by Lit Disco, literary distribution company here in Canada, which is a warehousing and sales force. Now, I recently heard back from Ed at Shadowpaw Press that the literary press group Salesforce just had their sales conference, and they've selected One Hand Screaming as a regional highlight, a key title to be promoted to Ontario booksellers. So I am beyond stoked, beyond pumped about that, because this book is going to be warehoused like a traditionally published title. I'll be doing a lot of work for a cross-Ontario book launch with it. And I'm going to be doing my very best to work with as many different chain and indie bookstores across Ontario, as well as libraries, to get in front of as many people as possible. And here's a cool tie-in, is that my work with this book is going to tie in really well with my nonfiction book that I mentioned, a few minutes ago, A Book in Hand, where I'll be engaging in as many in-person book selling options and partnerships and collaborations with book industry people as possible. 20 years ago, I self-published my first book. I have learned so much from so many people in the industry. I want to do everything that I can to invest in and apply as much of my learnings for this release. And I, dear listener, will of course keep you apprised of all of the options and opportunities and all of the things that go into the creation of this. That's the creation of the Kickstarter, the creation of the book itself, as well as the plans for promoting it and seeing if we can get the sales going really well. I think one of the cool bucket list items, I've been on the Calgary Times bestseller list when I launched iDeath back in 2014. But wouldn't it be cool to get, even if it's at the very, very tail end of, Globe and Mail bestseller list here in Toronto? I think that would be awesome. I would love to experiment with that and see if the thousands of dollars I'm investing in this are actually going to pay off. And if they don't, well, you can learn from my mistakes. So I'm not sure if you can hear that rattle in my voice, but I have babbled on for way too long. But I hope you did enjoy the extended personal update. Let's move on, shall we? Let's take a bit of a breath. We'll listen to the bumper, and then you and I can have a good listen to my conversation with Aaron Palmer. Hey, Aaron, welcome to the Stark Reflections podcast.
Thanks.
So it's great to have you on the show. I want to first talk a little bit to you about your creative life, I guess, as a writer and a musician, and perhaps even how that overlaps.
Sure. Where do you want to start?
Where did it start for you? Was that did you come out of the womb singing, sharing stories, or did that happen later on in life?
That was all later on. I think I have to start with like a humble brag here that I was tested early on.
Okay.
And had perfect pitch and tone.
What?
But
is that when you were crying a lot as a baby and they said, that's perfect? And it's like, let him cry. It's beautiful. No. Okay.
Yeah, it was ringing at just the right octave.
Yeah.
No, that was in like elementary school. And then I didn't pick up anything until later on. So probably in middle school, I picked up a guitar for the first time because it looked
Okay.
cool.
So prior to guitar, I remember in my early elementary school, we didn't have instruments, maybe because the budget of the school or whatever. We didn't get them till
Uh-huh.
grade 7 or 8, I think, middle school. But I do remember we sang for music class. Not very
Sure.
well, but did is that where they discovered it when you were doing vocal stuff?
I don't remember. I think it was a specific testing that they did for all students at the time,
Right.
which doesn't sound like something they do now because I haven't heard of it since then.
Yeah, I
But
know. We should test for artistic creativity.
yeah, right?
It sounds like a weird juxtaposition because the artistic creativity is beyond measure in many ways. But that being said, so you picked up the guitar. What was that first experience for you like, or what was it that spoke to you when that whole thing happened?
It was just, I guess it was the most accessible and coolest looking instrument. When you're in sixth or seventh grade, you just want to be seen
Right.
in the best way possible.
Okay. And this was an acoustic guitar, right?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what I picked up first. Honestly, I had an acoustic and an electric around the same time. So I might have picked up the acoustic first, but
Okay.
not by much.
And then in those early days, grade 6, grade 7, grade 5, whatever it was, what
Mhm.
sort of music was Aaron into that he's like, I want to play this? Because sometimes you're not playing the songs you really want to. You're playing the ones that are accessible to you.
No, no, definitely not. The first big concert I saw in like fifth or sixth grade was Van Halen.
Okay.
And I just said, that's what I want to do. Like right there.
I'm
So
Eddie. That's me.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of a leap though, from picking up and learning Itsy Bitsy Spider to then try to jump to Panama. So it took some time to get there.
Oh, fair enough. Fair enough. It takes some time to climb that water spout, right?
Yeah.
Because I mean, what a good analogy though for creatives in general and the
Right.
musicians, right? No matter how many times you climb up, something's going to try and wash you down, but you keep getting back up again. Is that what your experience was like as a musician?
Roughly, I wouldn't say there was anything really knocking me down. It was just, I think my ambition outweighed my abilities at the time.
Okay,
And so it was like, how fast can I get to where I want to be?
right.
I don't care about all this theory stuff. I just want to play.
Okay, all right. And so music happened around that age, so we have a perspective of your creative energy going into music. Were you
Yeah.
writing at that time? Did that come later?
No, no, I wasn't writing. I was writing songs or song lyrics, I guess, and
Yeah, yeah,
just sort of for myself and no one else. But I was heavy into the guitar. I played all the time. It came pretty naturally to me. And then later on, I dabbled in like every other instrument, but guitar was the main one.
right, right. Okay. But what was it then that got you into writing in general? What was that like? Again, I'm looking for those first sparks of creativity.
I was a pretty avid reader growing up.
Okay.
I was reading like Stephen King and Michael Crichton and stuff around that size in elementary school.
Hmm.
So I was just consuming everything that I could get my hands on, which is funny because now, I see what my kids are reading and we're cautious. We try to give them the appropriate stuff for their age, but I guess there was just no boundaries when I was a kid. It
Well,
was
or
whatever had
especially
cool cover.
yeah, and especially you probably understood. I was in a similar boat, a reading where my friends were still reading chapter books with pictures in them, and I was reading books for adults that I could read that level, but maybe the content was a little bit beyond what was meant for someone like me. But so you
Yes.
probably understand that too, right? Is yeah, okay. Maybe I need something a little bit more sophisticated for my reading level.
Yeah, very much so. And I was just drawn to horror and sci-fi and anything that would give me a good scare early on.
Yeah,
In middle school, I even got pretty big into true crime stuff. I remember reading Helter Skelter in
right.
like seventh grade and
Wow.
just being absorbed in that.
Well, because I know we're going to be talking a bit later on about genres and horror and thriller and stuff like that, and
Mhm.
science fiction, etc. When you mentioned Michael Crichton, I reflect back on if you look at the book Jurassic Park and even the movie, but the book a
Mhm.
little bit more so. the first half of the book is a science fiction novel,
Sure.
and the second half of the book is a horror novel. Did you find that? And you're attracted to both, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, I know he was like an airport writer, but
Yeah.
he was great in that way, in that he had the science and I guess medical background too,
Yeah.
that he could get pretty technical, but weave these, fantastic, I mean, not relatable, but somewhat grounded stories into
Yeah,
that.
of course. I always thought of him as very cinematic, and I say that not thinking it fit all the adaptations, but several of his novels I had read. I had not read Jurassic Park before the movie, but I
Mm,
had read some other books like Sphere that
yeah.
got turned into movies. And I just there was just something like he had this sparse nature of like it's just as light like a screenplay in the dialogue and you can actually visualize really well, which I thought was part of his mastery of storytelling.
Yeah, that's incredibly hard to do. That's probably why I was drawn to him so much.
Yeah, yeah. So Stephen King, Michael Crichton, and then
Mhm.
in terms of getting your own stories out there, what were you doing? Were you writing short fiction, or did you jump right into full length?
Honestly, that came much later.
Yeah.
I might have played around with some writing, but nothing intentional until I don't know, maybe college. Like
Okay.
halfway through college, I had a professor come to me and say, "You should really change your major to English. You're pretty good at this."
Really?
And he pushed me into it, and then I just loved it. It came so naturally to me. It wasn't like working at all. And that's when I started writing short fiction.
Okay. So interestingly, it was a teacher, a mentor figure in college
Yeah,
that prompted you into writing, and it was some sort of leadership in your elementary career that identified your talent or handed you a
right.
guitar too.
Sure.
Okay, cool. How important do you think mentorship is then to creative people?
I think so. I've never had a strong mentor. I had this discussion with someone else recently, but I think it's really important just in the sense that being creative is challenging because it's a pretty solo endeavor in any form. And when you're creating something, you don't know how the outside world is going to perceive it. So, it takes a lot of getting over yourself and just kind of putting your work out there and not feeling too like closely tied to it.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think, someone to step in to help you do that, to help you like create that separation and also to help you see that there are other people who do this too. And, it's okay to put yourself out there.
Right.
Yeah, that helps.
So is that, and this is transitioning into your role as a podcaster, as the is that something that you're trying to bring out by doing what you do, by interviewing writers and musicians and talking to them? And I guess I should preface that with saying we're talking about native tongues. That's your
Mhm.
show, right?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, we talk to writers and musicians about where it is they call home and how that place influenced their voice, in
Right,
their writing, in their musical style, whatever. And so it's part travel podcast talking about location and then a lot of just what makes creative people tick,
right. Okay.
like what drives them, how do they work? Because everyone has their own process.
So I'm curious that you tie that back to where they came from. I took a college course called the Writer, Literature, and Society, and
Hmm.
before we read each novel, we spent a day or two getting insights into the culture, the time period, the
Yeah,
location in the world it came from. So as we were reading it, we were aware of what the writer was couldn't help but pull into it. And
sure.
you're identifying that too, right? Like I perform this music or I write these songs or I write these stories, and here's how it ties back to my roots, my foundation, where I grew up. That
Oh, completely. Some people we've talked to, it's very intentional. I mean, think of, I don't know, someone like William Faulkner that's just so known for a specific location in the South. Like, what the characters are, what the landscape is, getting into
right.
it. And obviously that's where he was brought up because they always say, write what you know. And
Yeah.
so that sort of comes out sometimes naturally, sometimes not. And so there are people who really focus on that. I mean, take your Stephen Kings, right? Who
Yeah.
set almost everything in Maine, where they
Yeah.
live, just because they know it. But then there's a lot of people we talk to who like don't they don't do that on purpose. It just sort of comes out and they don't even recognize it until they're talking about it.
Does that happen on the show where somebody has an aha moment right in the middle of the conversation?
A little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of fun to peel back the layers and try to find those ties.
Yeah, I guess it always is, especially if the writer didn't even realize where that came from, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
So, a main character who potentially has a fear of something, and then only after conversation they realize, oh yeah, I had a cousin who this happened to,
Yeah.
or I forgot about this thing.
Right. Right.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. So, is writing therapy?
I knew that question was going to come up. It is. I mean, I go to therapy, so it's not my core therapy. It is therapeutic in a sense.
Right.
I deal with ADHD, and
Okay.
so I'm a very scattered person. I'm not regimented. I don't have a routine for everything, and I am a big multitasker. So I usually don't like to do any one thing at a time. If I'm writing, I need to have music on. I need to have other things that are distractions that it sounds difficult to do, but it kind of locks me in.
Right. Right.
Um, so knowing that and understanding that as an adult, it helps me, you know, get all this stuff out of my head,
Okay.
I guess
So
is the light way to put it.
yeah, no, that's a great way of looking at it. And you have more than one ways of getting that creativity out. I write. I
Yeah.
don't do music. I try, but I'm not good at it. But I would never consider myself a musician.
Right.
So when you are inspired, how do you know if it's going to be words on a page or it's going to be some sort of melodic, musical release?
So I have stuff going on in my head all the time. It's
Right.
like there's a radio on that I can just adjust the volume of.
Okay.
This is tough to explain, but there's a constant drumming or melody or something going through my head all the time. And there are times when something will stick and I say, oh, wait, I like that. And I'll go grab my guitar. I'll sit down at my computer and try to, work some beats out or something. And then to a lesser extent, the writing. So I am just kind of thinking all the time about writing and concepts. And I
Right.
keep a couple of documents. One is just log lines for, ideas for scripts. The other is concepts. So I'm taking those log lines or other concepts that I don't have log lines for and just extending them a bit. So it might be a paragraph, it might be half a page, but I mean, I have a ton of concepts and ideas to go back to on there. And every month or two, I take a look at it again because I forget them and
Right. Yeah.
just say, oh, yeah, yeah, this was a really good one. I could elaborate on this.
Yeah. I love the way you describe that because as a writer, I'm aware of those voices and the voice and the things that pop up constantly all day, no matter
Hmm.
what you're doing, even right
Yep.
now, that are ideas for stories. But
Yeah.
I've never thought about that similar thing that can happen with a musician where there's some music going on and you stop. It's just kind of like you stop and go, oh, yeah, that's a good one. I'm going to write that one down. So you do the
Yeah.
same thing with music then.
Completely. I read Dave Grohl's book recently, his biography,
Yeah.
which was really good. And there was a point in it when he talks about how he's got these rhythms and beats going on in his head, and he finds himself mashing his teeth or kind of clicking away the beats all the time. And it was shocking. I was like, oh my God, I do that constantly. I can't
Oh,
believe that's a
wow.
thing.
All right, so we're going to probe a little deeper on that.
Yeah.
In the middle of this interview, where I'm interviewing you instead of you interviewing a guest for your show.
Yeah, it's weird to be on the other side.
What's the style of tune that's going on right now, or what's the genre of music that's going on?
I I've been listening to a lot of like hardcore stuff this
Okay,
past week. Idols, Turnstile. some louder stuff. So that's kind of been where my head is
Okay.
at the moment.
So you've had to turn it down a little bit just for this conversation, I imagine.
Yes.
Okay. You're like, all right, but turn this down for a bit. I got to do this.
Yeah,
Okay.
right.
All right, let's go back to your podcast again. When did you launch it? I guess the inspiration for it we kind of already understand a little bit, but I'm curious about your evolution on the podcast and maybe moments that you had come out of it that perhaps you didn't even expect. Because I can
Mhm.
imagine there were probably some pretty phenomenal conversations that you've had.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So far. So I launched it the start of this year,
Okay.
January 2024, but I had been developing it since maybe August, September of last year.
Okay. It's quite a
And
lead. That's quite a lead time. Lots of preparation.
yeah, I'm a bit of a perfectionist,
Okay.
and I tend to go down rabbit holes of, being concerned about details that are so minor that, I have to step back and realize no one's going to notice this.
Right.
It's,
Yeah.
I have to remind myself that, what is it? Perfection is the enemy of good.
Or done.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Okay. Wow.
Um, and then prior to that, I had this note in my notes app that was just a description of the show for 5 years.
Really?
And I
You had
jotted
that
it down.
concept and it wouldn't leave you, right?
Yeah, no, it popped up every once in a while, but then I just didn't take that leap because it was all about, putting yourself out there. And finally I mentioned it to someone and they loved the concept and they said you should do that. And then I started to think about it and I was like, well, there's dumber people than me that have figured this out. So I can
Awesome.
get this off the ground.
So was that a bunch of research that you did? I mean, obviously you knew audio recording and stuff like that already, but podcast was a little bit different. And then just some of the other logistics, just
Yeah,
working all those details out.
exactly. The software, the platforms that you need,
Okay.
how to book people and how timing and how to record everyone separately and the editing.
Right.
Yeah, there's a lot to it. If you want it to sound good, I mean, if you
Yeah.
don't care, you can just
Yeah.
record and throw it out there.
I remember doing that in 2007. A short-lived podcast.
Yeah.
So in terms of you talked about putting yourself out there,
Hmm.
how similar or different is putting yourself out there on a podcast like this than it is on, sending your fiction out there, getting your fiction out into the world?
I think it's pretty similar. Uh, when I was younger, I definitely had that barrier of this might seem silly, people might laugh at it, no one's going to take it seriously
Right.
because I mean, for any creative concept, a creative job, like it all just seems so ethereal, like it's not a real thing
Right.
until it is. Uh, so I guess I just reached a point where I stopped caring and I thought if I actually want to do this stuff, I can't care. And I remember writing my first script and then just asking a bunch of people I knew, like friends, to take a look at it. And, they all did. Like they were all eager to jump on it and I got notes and that's how you get better. If you just
Cool.
hold on to something or if you're worried about how people are going to perceive it, you're not going to get any better.
Right. Yeah. That makes sense. What's the reception been to the, beyond that initial short audience, for your show or even for the writing?
For the show, so far I've heard good stuff, but
Okay.
maybe everyone's lying to me, We'll see how the reviews are
Yeah.
eventually. We've got a handful of episodes out now. There's a couple trailers, and I think I just released our fifth episode. And then we've got maybe 8 or 9 more lined up, a few more recorded. It's rolling. It's starting to pick up.
Right. Right.
Yeah, we're starting to get some bigger names too.
Awesome. That's exciting. That is awesome. And then I guess before we move on, where can people find out more about native tongues? Is there a landing page website or they just look for it on their podcatcher?
Yeah, so they can look for it anywhere. Podcatcher, it's on Spotify, Amazon, Apple, YouTube. We're building the web page right now, and hopefully that'll be up in another week or two. And I'm giving the Instagram a big facelift in the next week
Oh,
also.
Awesome. Awesome. Do you do video as well, or is it audio only?
We record video, so I have it in the bank, but we're
Okay.
not touching that yet.
I understand that. It's a lot of
Yeah.
work. It's an extra.
It is.
All right.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to dig back into horror and science fiction and thrillers and speculative fiction and all that stuff. What do you find yourself gravitating towards, or do you like going back to the buffet and picking different pieces?
I love going back to the buffet and picking different pieces. The problem is I'm not good at all of it.
Okay.
So I want to write a comedy, but I'm not a comedy writer. I can write bits of comedy, but start to
Right.
finish, I don't know how funny it would be. Character-driven dramas, I mean, I consume them. I love to watch them.
Yeah.
But again, it's just not how I write. Uh, it's much more of a challenge for me. I read everywhere that you're supposed to write characters first, and then that's how you draw people in because you care about the characters.
Yeah.
And I understand that, but I tend to write story first, concept.
Okay.
So that either starts with an inkling of an idea about the greater story or some kind of social message that I want to bury in, a horror or sci-fi concept.
Right. Right. So maybe starts with like that high concept that I always think of. I read
Yeah.
a lot of speculative fiction, and for me, it's the what if. Well, what if this were true?
Hmm.
And then a character can be born once I have this situation,
Yeah.
because the character in the situation, there could be a really great juxtaposition there, I
That's
think.
exactly it. And I, I'm not saying skimp on the characters,
Yeah,
but you can spend more time developing them
yeah,
once you understand the world that they're in.
yeah. And I think, for writers, there's no one way of doing anything, right? I mostly pants my stories in fiction, but I have plotted. I've been known to plot when the situation calls for it. But similarly, people maybe don't always eat the appetizer, the main course, then the dessert. Some people may want to start with the sweet.
Right.
So yeah, if it's working for you, roll with it, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think so.
Is that the kind of advice you would give, a similar advice to a musician and a writer, or is there a difference in that sort of advice you would offer?
I think you need to learn the foundations first. You need to understand how it
Okay.
all works. And, on the music side, know your scales, know your chords,
Right.
have some stuff that you like that you want to imitate, and then do your own thing because there's no right way to do it.
Okay. Yeah, I love that. I love that. But in terms of when you reach onto the parts of the buffet that are darker in the speculative realms that tend to go into the, dark thriller or dark fantasy or horror,
Yeah.
why do you think that that's something that appeals to you?
I have tried to figure this out for a while, and it's actually one of the questions that I am trying to find the answer to on my podcast too.
Really?
Yeah, I feel like I have a pretty mundane existence. I live in the suburbs. I live a safe, comfortable life.
Yeah.
And my theory is that like that's why I'm reaching out for more fantastical, otherworldly stuff.
Okay.
Escapism.
Yeah, it's like it's adding extra layers to the reality, I guess, in a fun way.
Yeah, exactly. It is a safe, fun way, but I don't know. I've always loved scares. Like I love that feeling, those endorphins released. It's like going on a roller coaster. Like you
Yeah.
want to be thrilled.
Yeah. And you can stop it at any time, right? With the book, you can just close it. Like it may continue on in your imagination as you're trying to go to sleep.
Yeah,
But at
right.
least, bam, you can close it. You can
That's
stop.
exactly it.
Yeah. With the roller coaster, you can't quite stop the ride.
Wait a few minutes.
Yeah, you just wait and it's done. It's done. All right, cool. So we were talking before we started recording about one of the concepts of writing for competition versus writing for literary recognition and awards, or
Hmm.
writing for pure pleasure and just satisfying the
Yeah.
readers. And they're not obviously always the same thing. What's your stance on those sort of realms of why you're writing?
I mean, my stance on that is I just don't take myself very seriously.
Right.
I don't think I'm, uh, the next great American writer. So I'm not chasing that. I don't care.
Right.
I just want to make stuff that is consumed. I want people to see what I'm writing, to hear what I'm making. I just want to be out there.
Okay.
Otherwise you just stockpiling and
Right.
you may be the greatest writer ever, but who's going to know?
Yeah. Now, speaking of not taking yourself seriously, I loved in your biographical outline that there's a comparison to Hemingway. Can you
Yes.
tell us that?
I honestly don't remember exactly what I wrote, but I saw
Oh,
the
here,
bio and
I have it written down here. You ready?
go for it.
Okay, Aaron Palmer has been described as this generation's Ernest Hemingway, not because he can write majestic prose, but because he equally loves to drink lots of rum.
Yes.
So that's one of those things that you share. Are there also cats involved?
Cats? Oh,
Well,
yeah, right. No.
okay, no, not
Definitely a
drinking
dog
cats.
person.
I mean Hemingway
No,
liked.
I got the reference. Yeah.
Okay, right. No, but is there a particular brand of rum? Is there one that you gravitate towards?
Good question. Yeah. Yeah. So one of my favorites is Bacoo, Bacoo. They've got
Okay,
a 12-year age that's fantastic. And part
really?
of what I like about rum so much is that I used to be a big whiskey drinker, but it's hard to find good whiskey and it's so expensive.
Okay.
Rum is just, it hasn't been discovered by like the masses yet.
Yeah, and I was just thinking that myself. When you said 12-year rum, I had
Mhm.
this epiphany because I think of 12 and 18 and 21-year scotches and ryes and bourbon, like all these other things.
Yeah.
But when it comes to rum, it's like, well, it's just rum. You put it, you make these drinks with it. Is it straight up? Is it how do you like to consume it?
Oh yeah, a rum like that I love on just an ice cube.
Yeah, okay. And there are
Otherwise,
like 12-year and fancy rums and they're a better price?
oh, so much better.
Oh,
Yeah.
really?
Absurd prices.
Mind blown.
I know.
I need
It's
to
much easier to find this stuff.
I need to reinvestigate that. I usually only think of rum in terms of for me in particular lately when I was young, it was obviously rum and coke and stuff like that. And then it got,
Mhm.
the rum beach drinks that are always very sweet and
Right.
stuff that you're by a pool or on a beach somewhere. But I've never really, unlike whiskey and scotch and bourbon and stuff like that, I've never really done this straight up, except for a
Yeah.
shot.
It's good
Wow.
stuff. I mean, the classic, the daiquiri is
Yeah.
not the frozen strawberry drink that we all know now, like the Jimmy Buffett style. It's
No.
the Ernest Hemingway daiquiri, if you order that anywhere, is I think it's like just rum and lime juice. It's something really simple like
Oh,
that.
rum with just like lime, a little bit of lime or something. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Whatever it
Wow.
was, he drank like what, 12, 15
Yeah.
of those a day or something
Yeah.
crazy like
Yeah.
that.
So I have to ask because I've been curious. I've been looking, and then this is for people listening to this in audio. You're not going to see the visual unless I do a screenshot and share it on the blog.
Yeah.
Um, those look like concert tickets that are framed in the wall behind you? Is that what those are?
Oh, yeah. I'm actually redoing this room now, but
Okay.
I redid another room and I've kept concert tickets my whole life. So I've got this box filled with like everything I've ever seen. And I finally figured out I wanted some art on the wall and I didn't know what to do. I don't really like buying generic art.
Yeah.
So I made these posters,
Oh, wow.
in black and white, cut the circles out, and then just filled with concert tickets.
That is so fantastic because yeah, you keep them, but what do you do with them? When we were
Right.
talking earlier, and you talked about, I, I was thinking geography when you were talking about writers and where they come from and how that affects their work.
Hmm.
I had a few flashes in my mind. Oh, globes, and then look a little closer. No, it looks like it could be like a cityscape. Maybe these are important locations. And then when
Yeah.
I actually looked, I went, no, those are concert tickets as well. So it's kind of
Yeah.
funny how sometimes the things we're talking about made me see different things behind you. And then I finally clued in. Of course, he says his first concert, Van Halen. So you've got all the different shows you've been to.
Yeah. And I go to a lot of concerts too. It's one of the
Yeah.
few things that I feel like I have no problem spending money on or traveling to.
Yeah. What
The
what
perfect
is it about?
indulgence.
I mean, I know as a musician yourself, there's an extra element to that, but I've always found it such a great communal experience to see live performances, whether it's at a big venue,
Hmm.
where the Van Halens of the world play. But I'm just a fan of a single person with a guitar in a pub. I mean, I just love the experience of that happening, where the music is being delivered to us,
Hmm.
and we as the audience are also, I guess, in a more intimate venue. They're more part of the act.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, I love live music in all forms. So I like someone playing in the corner of a room. I love like any kind of music, just as long as it's live and there's a performative aspect to it and it's exciting and it, gets you pumped up. I don't love huge concert venues. I saw Pink last year and she was really good, but like she took advantage of the whole stadium. That was
Yeah.
impressive. Usually I
Oh,
like,
really?
yeah, she was like put herself on high wires and was flying around and flipping and singing, and
Oh,
it was a
wow.
spectacle. Yeah, she's great. But normally I like club shows or something a little more intimate,
Right, right.
where you're not so far, you can like really feel the music.
I saw Bruce Springsteen in Hamilton, Ontario. Oh man, 10, 12 years ago.
Yeah.
And I was impressed with the fact that there was like a stage in the middle of the crowd
Hmm.
that he got himself to, thanks to the people, thanks to the fans,
Yeah,
which
that's awesome.
which was very trusting, because
Yeah,
he was
right.
playing guitar while they were laying on them, and they were moving him to the stage. But I was thinking also about venues, and I'm blanking on the guy's name, but it's a book about music itself from the lead singer from the Talking Heads, and I'm completely blanking.
David Byrne.
Thank you, David Byrne.
Yeah.
Have you read that?
The one that's like about music or how
Yeah, it's like
music is
this
made or
orange
something.
cover.
Yeah, I haven't gotten around to it yet, but it's on my list.
I think you would probably like that, only because I listened to the audio of it, well, while shoveling a few winters ago here. And a few of the things he talked about was a very specific smaller venue that the acoustics were just ideal, and so were the crowd dynamics. But then he also even talked about specific recordings in different places
Hmm.
that different musicians had done. Like you could only get this sound in this hallway, or you could only get. So they took the equipment
Yeah,
and they moved it into this church, or they did that. And I
sure.
imagine that as you think about different venues and why they're great and how people take advantage of the space, like Pink took advantage of that space. I
Yeah.
imagine that'd be something that would resonate with you. So
Oh,
this is
for
not,
sure.
yeah, it's not a book recommendation show, but when it comes up, right?
Yes, exactly.
Awesome. So, in terms of creative stuff, you launched the podcast, you're working on that. Has that taken away from your other creative output, like writing, music, stuff like that?
No, I don't think so. Because I got to design the logo, the art for the podcast. I'm working on more design stuff for the Instagram page now. And then I wrote and recorded the music for it. And I have a bunch of other pieces too that I want to work in somehow. So it's definitely tying a bunch of those creative needs together for me.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So, Aaron, for my listeners who are intrigued to learn more about you, about your podcast, about your writing,
Hmm.
where can they find out more about you?
Great question. I'm not, uh, I'm a very extroverted person, but I'm not on a lot of social media. I am. I just don't, I just kind of lurk. I don't put too much out there
Right.
just because I, there's no reason.
Okay.
But this will help. The Instagram page and the web page for Native Tongues is going to be sharing a lot more.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. And in terms of maybe your own music or your own writing, where if people were searching for them, where would they be able to find you?
That's my next step. I'm working on a
Oh,
web page for myself where I can post my scripts and just pieces of songs that I've been working on,
cool.
if
Awesome.
not completed works.
Excellent. Excellent. And potentially, because I am so far behind in all of the stuff I have to do, I'll reach out to you before this episode goes live, and Maybe there'll be links to those in the show notes, and I can always read them in the post-interview reflections.
Perfect. Yeah, that'd be great.
Awesome. Aaron, thanks for hanging out with me here on the show.
Yeah, it was great meeting you. Thanks for having me.
So a couple things I want to reflect on the conversation with Aaron, and one of them is the soundtrack, the music that's always beating in the back of his head, and every once in a while he'll stop and write something down, and then he'll come back and build this. Now, again, when I heard him say that, I'm like, dude, I've been doing this my entire life. I still have file folders of notes that I wrote when I was a teenager. That sometimes they come back. Sometimes they do. I mean, I mentioned in my extended personal update, I, Death, the novel I, Death that was published in 2014. Well, that was based on a less than 1,000-word short story called I, Death that I wrote in grade 10 in a free writing exercise. Thank you, Mr. Gary Furman. And I do have to say, the book that I published with Western Colorado University, project I'd take a public domain title, I did Walking and Other Excursions by Henry David Thoreau. I dedicated that book to Gary Furman, and I contacted him and asked for his address, and I sent him a signed copy of that book, thanking him so much for his inspiration, because I remember it was grade 12, and he wrote an inspirational quote from Henry David Thoreau in one of my yearbooks, and it wasn't until probably 15 years later that I read Thoreau for the first time and really engaged with his essay Walking and the desire and the love of nature and walking in nature and stuff like that. Anyways, look, I diverted again. I reflected upon a reflection. But all that is to say that there are things that I may have written decades ago, notes and stuff like that, that I can come back to. The reflection here, the important thing is you as a creative person probably get tons of ideas all the time. Sometimes an idea that you had 15, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, last week, whatever it was, maybe you weren't ready to work on it until a later time. So that is a great thing. Your own imagination from the past can be an amazing resource that you can lean on. So that's the first reflection. The second one was when Aaron said, I mean, I'm paraphrasing here, but if you just hold on to something and you spend too much time worrying about how people might receive it and never put it out there, you might never get better. Because often it's the feedback and it's seeing how people react, and it's taking the chance. And there's a huge chance, and you know this, when you take something you've written and suddenly you release it to the world, as my dear friend, science fiction writer Julie Cherneda said in an interview I did with her way back in the 90s, I think, upon the release of one of her first novels. She says, it's like standing naked on the front lawn. Everyone can see everything. And that vulnerability is how it feels. And it's hard. I get it. It is really hard putting something out there. And I have had pretty much almost everything I've published, I've had people crap on it. And that happens. That I call the pineapple on pizza principle. You create something like an amazing thing. Like, I'm not a big fan of Hawaiian pizza, but I do love pineapple with hot peppers and a vegetarian style pizza. Just love that. But there are some people for whom the pineapple is just not a thing on pizza. So that's where those 1-star reviews and people crapping on your work happen. But you also get the people who resonate with what you've said, with the characters, with the situation, going back to the comment from Edwin, who resonate with something about how the character looks inside, in their heart, in their mind, in their soul. And that's where the magic can happen. So taking that chance, taking that risk, being vulnerable and getting the writing out there can help you to understand how this may or may not resonate with different readers, which can also lead to becoming a better writer, because then you can now go, okay, I see what's people are liking, and therefore I can potentially, if I like writing that stuff, I can continue to do the other thing. I can see where there was some miscommunication, and maybe I can improve that. But also, and this is something a little bit more reflective and deep, is that when you put that out there, you're probably telling someone else out there, and you may never hear this, and this is the difficult part as a writer, that you made a difference, that you touched them, that you connected with somebody in a really deep and meaningful and powerful way. And isn't that awesome that you did that? And again, most of the time when we do this, we will never hear it. Which is why when I was at the Toronto Indie Author Conference last week and I had people mention they listen to my podcast, they love this or they enjoyed that, etc. Most of the time I never get that feedback. So I have to take it upon faith that when I'm putting the writing into the world and when I'm putting the podcast into the world, that there are people who hear something in it, maybe a little bit here or a little bit there, and that is the connection, and that's what resonates with them. And oh my God, that is so beautiful and magical and powerful. Well, that's it for my reflection. I hope you enjoyed the interview with Aaron. I hope you enjoyed the extended reflections and personal updates and all that stuff that surround the podcast. If you do like the podcast, I would love it. I would appreciate if you left a review for the podcast wherever you happen to listen to podcasts. That does make a huge difference. Just like getting a review for a book makes a difference, getting reviews on the podcast make a difference. But also, share episodes that you think are useful with someone else that you think is going to get some benefit from it. That means the world to me. You, dear listener, mean the world to me. Thank you for letting me bend your ear and reflect a little bit here. So, until next week, and until next episode, this is Mark Leslie Lefebvre wishing you, dear listener, great writing and good Stark Reflections.
Thank you for listening to the Stark Reflections podcast. You can find show notes for each episode at starkreflections.ca.
The music for this podcast, Laser Groove, was composed and produced by Kevin MacLeod. Check out more of Kevin's great music at incomptech.com.